Hi, everyone.
Hi, Saravana, welcome. I'm just waiting a couple of seconds because I know it takes a little bit for people to sign in. So I see that got one attendee at the moment. And I'm just going to wait like a couple of seconds because I know that there's a bit of a lag from when we go live to when people sign in. There we go. So we're just having a little wait for our attendees to join us and welcome as they roll in. So and I'll get started in half a minute in opening this session on child health. Okay, I think I'll get started then. I see some attendees rolling in, and welcome everybody to day 2 of the IUSSP Population, Poverty and Inequality Conference. We're just so delighted that you can join us. It's been such a flurry. We had this same conference in Michigan in the US last year, and it was great to meet in person, and it's been an adjustment for everybody around the world to now have to flip all of our conferences to going virtual. And I definitely want to extend my thanks to the IUSSP staff for ensuring that this was able to happen at a virtual level. And so I just really appreciate this being able to occur and see all these great papers come to life on screen. So this is the session on child health. It's actually the second session. We had a lot of sessions on child health, and we've got 4 really great papers that we'll go through today. And so as each of the papers are being presented, I encourage everybody to please use the question and answer. So attendees using the question and answer, and the panelists using the chat. And this will really help us with the discussion, and it also helps the authors of the paper. Even if it doesn't come to the verbal chat at the end, we can kind of see it in the chat. So it's a really great way for the authors to get feedback. So I encourage everybody to get lively with that. So maybe without further ado, I'll ask Alfred to get started with our first paper, which is from Johannes from the University of Innsbruck, and modeling children's anthropometric status. I look forward to this paper.
Hello everybody, and welcome to the conference hosted virtually by the IUSSP this year from my side as well. I hope everybody is doing okay given the current situation. My talk will cover my most recent paper, Modeling Children's Anthropometric Status Using Bayesian Distributional Regression, merging socioeconomic and remote sense data from South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. And I have been working on in collaboration with Kenneth Hartgen from the ETH Zurich, Thomas Kneip from the University of Göttingen, and Stefan Lang from the University of Innsbruck. The presentation will give a brief sketch of the paper forthcoming at Economics and Human Biology. Before summarizing the main results of the paper, I will give a brief overview of my talk, which I will start with an introduction that highlights the development of childhood malnutrition at a global scale, which is then followed by a short overview on the data and the methodology used. Then my talk will continue discussing in more detail the main findings of this research project, and will end with a brief outlook on potential future topics. So let's start. Throughout the last 3 decades, global child health, and in particular under 5 mortality and acute and chronic malnutrition, declined globally. Moreover, most regions saw under 5 mortality rates declining significantly, and the prevalence of chronic malnutrition decreased since 1990. This development is also illustrated in the maps below that illustrate chronic malnutrition for the year 1990 on the left-hand side, and for the year 2018 at the right-hand side. Globally, under 5 mortality declined from about 90 deaths per 1,000 live births in 90 to about 40 in 2018. And similar, the prevalence of chronic malnutrition decreased from about 33% to about 22% over the same time period. These improvements in relative terms are also accompanied by an improvement in absolute numbers. And the number of under 5 deaths decreased from 12.5 million in 1990 to 5.3 million in 2018. Similar chronic malnutrition decreased from 250 million affected children to 149 million affected children in 2018. Despite this progress at a global scale, the maps highlight that cases are not equally distributed across space. In two major regions are disproportionately affected, namely Africa and Asia. Within these regions, especially Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia are most affected, and around 80% of all child deaths and around 90% of all malnourished children are concentrated in these two regions. Hence, the need to reduce the risk of dying as a child and the prevalence of childhood malnutrition remain major challenges to improve global child health. This is of particular importance as the failure to improve child health outcomes has severe long-term consequences for the individuals, the household, as well as at the macroeconomic level. For instance, malnutrition can be linked to a higher susceptibility of diseases, a higher risk of dying, and is associated with reduced income as adult. Therefore, monitoring the progress towards the goals agreed on in the Sustainable Development Goals is an important intermediate step. And coming now basically to the discussion how malnutrition is actually measured. Basically, it can be said that in presence of a vital registration system or when large household surveys with birth histories are present, the assessment of the mortality status is straightforward. And contrary, malnourishment and in particular micronutritional deficiencies are not directly covered using these large household surveys. Hence, the assessment of malnourishment, basically the common approach is to assess the anthropometric status of children, as insufficient nutritional intake cause growth failures. And the three standard indicators are the height for age, weight for age, and the weight for height set score. They all reflect different types of nutritional deficiencies and are therefore helpful to assess the nutritional situation of a population, as well as at the individual level. And comparability across regions is achieved by standardizing using an international reference group. This is feasible since, especially during early childhood, growth patterns are remarkably similar across human populations, and genetic variation is widely shared among different populations. And between 80 and 90% of the variation in the anthropometric status can be attributed to environmental and socioeconomic factors that overshadow the variation due to genetics and ethnic differences. And now discussing briefly the data set we used. In most low and middle income countries, a vital registration system does not exist. And the assessment of the country's health situation relies on large household surveys such as the demographic and health surveys. The DHS are conducted since the 1980s and now surveys for more than 90 low and middle income countries are available. The questionnaires are standardized across time and across countries such that the individual country surveys can be pooled together and form the main database of this article. They provide detailed information on a country's population, health, nutrition, and education, amongst others. Usually the spacing between surveys is approximately 5 years, and between 5 and 30,000 women between 15 and 49 years are interviewed and are included in the surveys. Due to this large number of surveys, so far more than 300 surveys have been conducted. The number of included children, and which are then analyzed, is about 1.2 million individual children. To explore possible correlates and to improve the explanatory power of the models, the demographic and health service data is merged with economic and environmental data from various sources, ranging from the economic data such as the country's GDP to remote sensed information about drought severity or rainfall at the location of the primary sampling unit a child resides. So coming now to the modeling approach, assessing anthropometric measures and associated risk factors while controlling for geographic factors is not new. and it will help to evaluate and monitor the progress of the Sustainable Development Goal, and in particular, goal number 2. In addition, the study by Oskar Zimmermann highlights the high spatial heterogeneity, which implies that still not all important connections are uncovered when solely relying on remote sense information. If this would be the case, modeling with covariates could explain all important relationships, and the maps of the spatial effects would be no longer informative. To account for this, we use an approach based on Bayesian distributional regression models, and that allows to model all parameters of a given distribution. Here we assume the response to be Gaussian, and accordingly all parameters of the normal distribution are linked to a predictor using the corresponding link function. Moreover, all parameters are also linked to a structured additive predictor that allows, for example, to account for nonlinearities of continuous covariates, to explore differences between, for example, the gender using Orion coefficients, and also to incorporate spatial correlation, amongst others. And these maps here basically illustrate the spatial patterns of malnutrition. And in the first row, the results for girls are shown, while the second row depicts the results for boys. And the last row illustrates the joint spatial-temporal effect or the standard deviation, showing large differences across space and time. And over time, the height for age z-score improved for both girls and boys. However, differences between regions are striking. And it can be said that the greatest progress on the height for age z-score was achieved in South Asia, whereas progress seems to have stagnated and only to have improved after the fifth wave of the demographic and health surveys in sub-Saharan Africa. In addition, several small hotspots can be found, for instance here, Madagascar, however also in northern Nigeria, for example. Then here, next figure, the figure 3 illustrates the marginal effect together with the 10, 30, 70, and 90% quantile of the years of education of the mother for the 4 analyzed geographic regions and Madagascar separately. With increasing education level of the mother, also the height for age z-score increases. This result can be seen exemplarily for other socioeconomic factors and should highlight the importance of those. As seen on the previous slide, the maps still contain information implying that variation in the anthropometric measure is not entirely explained by the included covariates. And even though rather complex regression models are used, not all important connections are uncovered. Or in other words, it can be assumed that heterogeneity is not entirely spatial at all, and other mechanisms like, for example, conflicts or rule of law are important to explain the variation in the outcome. Now, summarizing everything and coming to the end of my talk, which I will summarize my main points and will also highlight some important limitations and give a brief outlook of potential future topics. This study highlights the importance of socioeconomic factors associated with growth failures, and that it is important to account for the high heterogeneity when analyzing health outcomes of children. And in addition, by using a structured additive predictor, this study can account for existing nonlinearities. And amongst others, limitations of this study are that the anthropometric measure are only observed for living children, and accordingly, the analysis is restricted to this subset of children living at the day of the interview, which potentially introduces a bias. Moreover, which is true for most observational data, the analysis shows correlations and not a causal relationship. However, it highlights the close connection of growth failures and socioeconomic factors. And even though this study uses a sophisticated approach to account for heterogeneity, still not all relationships are uncovered, which basically for me raises the question if heterogeneity is spatial in nature, and maybe other mechanisms also exist that would help to better explain growth failures. Yeah, and this was it basically from my side, and thank you for your attention, and thank you for organizing this conference.
Great, thank you. Yeah, great. We're just going to move straight through to the next presentation. Thank
you. My name is Jen Devara. Today I'm going to present my research topic on the persistent influence of caste on under 5 modeling, the factor that explains the caste-based gap in high focus states in India. So I'll follow this outline in my presentation. So why does this under 5 mortality rate study is important in case of India? So if you look at the figure 1, so this is the global scenario of under 5 death in 2010 to 2015, and this data has been taken from the UNWPP 2017 for the 175 countries, and we can see here that the India's under 5 absolute death is still highest compared to the other countries. Whereas in figure 2, we can see the trend of under 5 mortality rate between 1990 to 2016. And we can see here, except Pakistan and Bangladesh, India's under 5 mortality rate is still high in all the other compared to the other South Asian countries. So, although we know that child mortality has declined drastically in India the last 2 decades, but still regional and socioeconomic inequalities exist. In the era of sustainable development goal, the reducing of neonatal under 5 mortality remains important. It is a priority, and it is continuous to be a major public health concern, particularly in low and middle income countries. And within these LMICs countries, India contributes the highest number of under 5 mortality, as we see in the figure 1. And this burden of children dying is disproportionately carried by the regions and the socially disadvantaged group. And this burden of child mortality in high focus states in India has been a major concern for the policymaker as well as the researchers. And the high focus states in India is designated in such a way that by the government of India because of their persistently high child mortality and the relatively poor socioeconomic and health indicators. And in the recent studies in 2018, which demonstrated that the majority of the districts in the high focus states are not likely to achieve the sustainable development goal in case of preventable death of newborn. The caste affiliation of India in Indian caste systems traditionally is the traditional system of social stratification, which has existed more than 3,000 years. And in ancient Varna systems, this is divided by the Hindu society initially into 4, but later into 5 categories in the distinct Varna or caste systems. And they are mutually exclusive or hereditary or endogamous in the occupation specific mainly. And out of these, the Brahmin is the priest, Kshatriyas is mostly the warriors, Vaishyas for the traditional merchants, Sudras, those who are engaged in the menial jobs, and those who the most depictable menial jobs, it's called there is Sapati Sudras, or formerly it is untouchable. And this untouchable is the lowest social standing in the caste system. And people, those who belongs to the Sudil caste, which was previously referred as untouchable. Whereas in the Sudil tribes communities, those peoples who are mostly in the tribal areas and mainly reside in mainly the forest areas. And this Sudil caste and Sudil tribe historically is a marginalized and a disadvantaged social groups, and officially it was recognized as by the Indian constitutions. And in 2011 census, altogether it constitute more than 25% of the total country's populations. Despite continuous effort by the government as well as the funding or development agencies, but there's still these group still facing multiple disadvantages compared to the rest of the population, and still they have a lower socioeconomic and development indicators. the life expectancy is still low, then both child and adult mortality is still relatively high. Almost 50% of the maternal death in the country belongs to this group, and the children are more underneath among these group compared to the other populations. And with this, these two objectives in this study. First one is to re-examine the disadvantage of mortality rate experienced by the civil caste and children tribe children in the high focus state. And next one is to quantify the relative contribution of socioeconomic determinant of under 5 disease by explaining the caste pay gap between socially disadvantaged and not disadvantaged caste group in the high focus states. And we have used the NFS's National Family Health Survey data, which is popularly known as a demographic and health survey data. The 4 round of data we have used, so the last 3 round only we have used to see the trend analysis, and latest round, which is NFHS 4, is used to use for the other analysis. And this NFHS 4, the first time in the NFHS history, they have provided district level indicators. And we are restricted only the high focus states for the 4 districts based on the 2011 census, and based on the previous literatures, we have used these states like as a high focus states, which belongs to like Assam, Bihar, and so on, which constitute more than 48% of the India's populations. And in this the studies under 5 mortality is our dependent variable, and exposure variables we use demographic, socioeconomic, and program indicators. And these under 5 mortality rate estimations, we use the direct estimation method based on the child birth history data, and we use the approach which was developed by the Rostein and Rosas in 2003. This is called synthetic cohort probability approach method. And we use this bivariate logistic and decomposition analysis in this research. And decomposition analysis, as we all know, blind Ahaka is the most popular techniques for the decomposition analysis to see the group mean of these two groups. However, for the binary outcome, this is not appropriate. That's why we have used the extension of the OHACA, which is developed by the Craig in 2005. And findings, so we can see in the level and trend across the social group for the 4 round of analysis data, we can see that under 5 mortality has been declined among most in case of ST children, but still it is higher among SC and ST in 1992 to 2016 in all these periods. Under 5 mortality rate, this high focus states is substantially higher than the target set by the SDG goal. Also, if we look at by the state wise, so what we can observe here that under 5 mortality rate for ST belonging to these states like Bihar, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh, these states are substantially higher compared to the non-SC populations. Whereas in case of under 5 mortality for ST children, those who are belonging to the Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, they are relatively high corresponding their non-SC populations. If we look at the district level under 5 mortality by different caste group wise, so what we can see that are poor performing states in case of ST populations geographically concentrated in these states, particularly in the Rajasthan, UP, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, whereas for ST, we can see those who are concentrated mainly MP, Chhattisgarh, and Orissa. And these are the comparison of the selected characteristics which we use in this model, in this analysis. So what we can see, the substantial variations is observed in the different caste groups, where the mother's level of education and the wealth of the household also varies in SC/ST and non-SC/ST populations, and also most of the populations are inhabited in the rural in SC/ST, whereas the non-SC/ST, the lesser populations are inhabited in the rural populations. In the logistic regressions, what we can choose here, the socioeconomic and proximate indicators are the essential indicators here to explain the caste differential in under 5 districts. And here, one important observation we can see here that SC children are most likely to under 5 death compared to the non-SCC population across all these stepwise models. And these logistic regressions by caste group wise, what we can observe here that for all the caste groups, children are less likely to die when their mothers have completed secondary or at least a higher educations than the children who have no educations, the mothers who have no educations. And in case of household wealth also, as the level of wealth of the household increases, the odds of under 5 mortality significantly decreases for the SCs and the non-SST, however, no significant observations for the ST children. And the proximate factors like birth order and then antenatal care visit is significantly associated with the under 5 death for all the caste groups. It is fairly decomposition results, but we can see that the factors which are included in this analysis can explain 76% of the under 5 mortality gap between the SCST and non-SCST populations. And of this explained gap, around 83% can be related to the difference in the distributions of women education and household wealth for the under 5 death rates. And for the unexplained, the remaining 24% of the under 5 might be this related to the other structural factor, which was not covered for this data set in the analysis. And this positive contribution of the covariate, which indicate that these particular covariates contributed to the widening the under 5 death rates gap between these groups, and negative contribution of the covariate, which indicate that it helping to reduce the gap. So that's how we can explain from this analysis. And in the summary, that the disparity of under 5 mortality has pronounced by the caste group during the pre-National Rural Health Mission period, which was established in 2000 as the largest intervention program for the maternity and child health care programs. And this disparity has been reduced drastically in this recent year. And this success may be attributed to the NRHM, under which special provision has been made for the maternal and child health care services for women and children belonging to this marginalized or deprived caste. This is a positive indicator, positive sign for the NRHM program. Despite the reduction of under 5 death rates, children belonging to the ST populations experiencing high mortality rate than the children belonging to the non-SCST for the period 1990 to 2016. And as expected, the under 5 death rate shows significant decline with increase in educational level and the household wealth. And household environmental factor, the type of toilet use is also significantly associated in the under 5 death rates. And among the program indicator, the place of birth and number of ANC visit during pregnancy is also significantly associated to reducing the under 5 death in this high focus state. And decomposition analysis shows that the 83% of caste-based care in under 5 death due to the distribution of the common level of educations and the wealth between SCST and non-SCST populations. And program indicators like place of birth and number of antenatal care also significantly contributed in widening the caste-based gap in under 5 mortality. And this study indicate that there is still room to improve access in the healthcare facilities for mother and children belonging to the deprived caste groups in India and the high focus states, and the continuous effort to raise the level of maternal education and economic status of the population, people belonging to the these caste groups should be equally pursued simultaneously. So in this work has been already published in PLOS ONE in 2019. Thank you. So we'll see you in the live session on 9th December.
Hi everyone, I'm Saravana and I'm so happy to be able to present my work at this conference. Even though it's virtual, I'm really happy for the opportunity to be able to present this to you today. So I'm going to be talking about parental investments and early childhood development, short and long run evidence from India. Now, I want to start by noting that the question of how to build human capital with limited resources remains a key policy problem in developing countries. Now, an increasing number of countries, including India, which we'll look at in this study, provide early childhood services for young children. However, I would argue that little is known about the parental investment responses to such programs in developing countries. Okay, and the impacts of such programs are going to depend on the interaction between investments made by the government and investments by parents, the technology for human capital formation, parental preferences across children, in addition to other factors. And this is important because reallocation of investments by parents so as to compensate or reinforce such investments by the government could have important implications for the siblings of children exposed to such programs. This, in turn, could have important distributional impacts of such policies. So in this paper, I ask two key questions. So first, what are the health, education, and labor market impacts of government-provided early childhood programs? Okay. In the paper, I also look at short-run outcomes on children, but in this talk, I want to present the long-run outcomes for adults who were exposed to the program when young. Next, I ask, how do parental investments respond to such programs? Okay. In the paper, I consider two dimensions, intertemporal as well as intra-household reallocation of investments. And here I want to focus on the intra-household aspect. Okay, so think of a household with two kids, one where, in a case where one kid gets exposure to the program and the other doesn't. Okay, so what are the impacts on the siblings of the child exposed to the program? Okay, to give you a very quick snapshot of what I do, I'm going to use the rollout of the world's largest early childhood program, the Integrated Child Development Services in India, to study these impacts. I'm going to be exploiting differences across districts in the number of ICDS centers constructed, along with differences across cohorts induced by timing of program arrival in these districts. Okay, so that's going to lend itself very naturally to a difference in differences empirical strategy. Now, what really makes all of this possible is historical administrative data on the program that I collected and merged with a number of household survey data sets. I'm going to show you that individuals who were exposed to the program when young experienced positive impacts along various dimensions of health, education, and labor market outcomes. However, parents reallocate investments towards children with greater program exposure at the expense of children who are not exposed. Okay, so I find negative spillovers on the siblings of children who are exposed to this policy. Okay, so I think I contribute, broadly to two large strands of the literature. So there's been a lot of theoretical as well as empirical work from the US as well as other developing country settings on the impacts of early childhood interventions. And this includes work on the ICDS program as well. I think this is sort of unique in that in this paper, I look at the long-run outcomes across a whole variety of health, education, and labor market impacts. And this really is the world's largest early childhood program, and I do want to stress that. The other contribution, I think, is in the space of understanding parental investments in children in developing countries. And there's been some recent work that has come out, some really interesting work out of a variety of contexts, Malawi, Colombia, Bangladesh, among others. And I think this is where it's really important to study how parents invest in children, but also how parents might relocate their investments when the government also comes in and provides a program like this. Okay, so a very quick background on the ICDS program. So this program was launched in 1975 to provide primary healthcare services as well as preschool education to children under 6 years of age. Okay, so it's called integrated because there are these two broad components of health and education. So some examples of health services include immunizations, supplementary nutrition, health checkups, health information, and so on. Okay, and preschool is a very typical preschool curriculum that's taught to kids in these centers. So there are physical centers that are constructed all over India that provide this program, and it really is the world's largest early childhood program. By 2010, the program was reaching about 40 million children each year, and the Indian government also spends a lot of money on this. So about 2.9 billion US dollars in their 2020-21 ICDS budget. Okay. Now, crucial to this study is the fact that there was a rollout of the program slowly that took place across India. So there's a lot of heterogeneity over time and across Indian districts in the timing as well as the intensity of the program implementation. And I'll refer you to the paper for lots of more figures, maps, as well as tables that illustrate how the program rollout took place. Okay, but this is really what I'll be exploiting to identify impacts of the program. Key to this study is administrative data on the ICDS that I collected in partnership with the Ministry for Women and Child Development in India that details when and where each center was opened. Right, so for each of these, and there are more than about 1 million of these centers all across India today, for each of these centers, when it was opened and where it's located, right, since program inception in 1975. I then merged this data with a number of household survey data sets. Okay, so this includes lots of data that this spans health data from the DHS or the National Family Health Survey for India, ASER data, which is really great education outcomes, as well as the NSS National Sample Survey for India for employment-related outcomes, parental investments, and such. Okay, so the empirical strategy is going to be a difference in differences, as I've alluded to. And so, the broad idea is to compare individuals who were born at the same in the same year and the same state, but in different districts, and so they had different levels of program exposure. Okay, so that's going to be the main idea in this strategy. And so I'm going to have my outcome variable of interest, which is an education, health, or labor market outcome. And then I'm going to study looking at individuals who are born in the same year and state, but in different district subdivisions, right? The key variable that I'm interested in is this program intensity, which is the average number of centers per 1,000 children in that district subdivision of birth over the age range over which individuals were eligible to take up ICDS services. Okay, and so beta is that coefficient that I'm interested in, right? So as this program intensity is higher, what are the impacts of that on these outcome variables of interest? And I'm going to have a whole set of controls when doing this to capture and control other variables that might affect these outcome variables, right? Okay, now, as with the difference in differences approach, I'm going to have several identifying assumptions, right? Crucial to that is the fact that I'm assuming identical counterfactual trends in treatment and control regions. And so I do a number of things in the paper. I won't get into much detail here, but I'd refer you to the paper for details on I show that program placement is not systematically correlated with pre-existing village infrastructure conditional on these fixed effects. I do a number of placebo tests using leads and lags of program exposure. Okay, so this program is for kids under 6 years of age. And so the idea is that if there are a bunch of centers that are built when these kids are age 8, 9, 10, that should not have an effect on the outcomes of interest because individuals are no longer eligible to go and avail services from ICDS centers. Okay, so it uses that age eligibility criterion and uses leads and lags of program exposure. Then I assess robustness using village fixed effects, state-specific time trends, and so on. I also am careful in showing that there's no other programs that had a rollout that was systematically correlated with that of the ICDS. Okay, so I'm really picking up the effects of the ICDS and not some other government program. I'm going to consider a number of outcome variables here, and so I will be adjusting my p-values for multiple hypothesis testing using Bonferroni-Sanko procedure that takes into account not only the different number of outcomes within each family, but the correlation between those variables as well. Okay, so let's jump straight into the key long-term program impacts that I find. Okay, and so in this figure, on the x-axis, I have the effect size in standard deviation units, and on the y-axis, I have these broad families of health, education, labor market outcomes, and these are sort of oriented such that point estimates to the right of the red vertical line, these are improvements in these outcomes, and point estimates to the left, these are worsening of these outcomes. Right? So that's the direction, and 95% confidence intervals are shown. And so what you can see is that consistently across these different health, education, and labor market outcomes, there are significant impacts of the program for individuals who were exposed when they were young. Right? So for health, I have a mix of objective as well as subjective measures of health. Okay, so these objective biomarker measures include blood hemoglobin levels, blood glucose levels, and so you see improvements there. And then there are some more subjective measures, right? So if you ask individuals, okay, how are you doing in terms of health? There's a health score. Healthy behavior, so this is something that has been studied in the literature. So individuals exposed when young were less likely to smoke or consume alcohol. As adults, they were more likely to be literate, have more years of schooling, be employed, and also earn a higher wage. Okay, so consistently you see that there are these positive impacts of the program. Next, I want to turn to the intra-household reallocation of parental investments. And here the idea is the following, right? So you have individuals who may have the same level of program exposure, but they have siblings who had different levels of program exposure, okay? So you want to think about, say, two kids who have the same level of program exposure, but one had siblings with a higher level of program exposure than the other. Okay, so that's the identification strategy here. So controlling for one's own level of program exposure, what is the impact of having siblings with greater program exposure? So here, again, I'm going to have my outcome variables of interest that I care about. I'm going to control for a whole host of things. I'm going to have district by cohort by age fixed effects, which also absorbs one's own program exposure and controls for a bunch of other things. Conditional on all of that, I'm going to be looking at the effects of an increase in the program intensity of siblings on one's own outcomes, right? Again, with a whole set of controls. And what do I find? So here, I'm plotting the point estimate for beta along with these 95% confidence intervals. And so, perhaps we can start on this bottom panel here where I plot various measures of parental investment. So these may be direct or indirect measures. And so you see that consistently, parents do seem to invest less in the siblings of children with higher program exposure. Okay? This has a direct effect on the human capital of the siblings, right? So if you look at their health, their anthropometric outcomes, their education, reading, math scores, across all of these, they're doing worse. And that's a direct effect of the decrease in parental investments for these children. Okay, so I find negative spillovers on the sibling of children exposed to the ICDS program. Okay, so to conclude, I want to note that really the aggregate effects of such early childhood programs depend not only on the direct effects for exposed cohorts, but also the indirect impacts that may arise due to the reallocation of parental investments. And so the aggregate effects may be lower than the direct effects if these indirect impacts are negative, as in this case, where we had these negative spillovers on siblings. In the paper, I do a cost-benefit analysis and show that the aggregate effects are actually lower by about 10%. Right, so there's a decrease in the rate of return to the program because of these negative spillovers. Okay. So Thank you so much. I look forward to discussing more.
Hello, everyone. My name is Adeola Oyenubi. The title of my presentation is Does Child Support Grants Incentivize Childbirth in South Africa? It's a joint paper with Uma Kulamparambio. So to go straight in because of time, the question of whether the child support grant incentivize procreation is one, but is controversial and of interest in countries that actually have this kind of program. It's not controversial because it raises the question of idea of trying to take social assistance away. Let me note upfront that this is not our argument. Our argument, if anything, is that the social assistance program should be structured in such a way that it does not include an incentive for that may be detrimental to the program in the long run. So an example of a country where this has been this debate has existed for a while is in the US, and it has prompted the introduction of what is called a family cap, which essentially denies a mother that is currently benefiting from child welfare from receiving additional amount because of giving birth to another child. So if you're in child welfare, you're not allowed to claim additional amount for giving birth to another child. In the case of South Africa, most of the studies that have investigated the child support grant have focused on the effect of child support grant on child welfare. And rightly so, these studies have shown that child support grant is beneficial to benefiting children because it improves their ability to stay in school, it improves nutrition, and there is literature that backs it up in South Africa. The purpose of this study is not to contest the result of those analysis. We actually believe that it is correct to provide assistance to children. Our argument is that does this assistance include an incentive that may be detrimental to the program in the long run? So to answer this question, we first look at existing studies in South Africa that have investigated this question, and to note most of this study found that child support grant does not incentivize childbirth, even though a handful argue against that. And these are some of the problems we found with existing study. Some of this study either rely on qualitative analysis of descriptive statistics of fertility rates at the aggregate level. This is obviously problematic because it means that you cannot control for confounding factors. Some of the studies, in fact, most of the studies frame the question as that of timing of second birth or teenage pregnancy. So you're focusing on new mothers. And this is problematic because it's only new mothers that can procreate as a result of receiving the child support grant. The other point is that most of these studies are localized. So they focus on specific locations, and in other words, they are not nationally representative. So in our analysis, we try to address some of this issue, especially the one that has to do with considering higher order births. I provided an explanation for that just now. So, like I said, most of the existing study found that the CSG does not incentivize childbirth, but we found that there are methodological issues with this study, like I discussed earlier. One of the more important ones that we highlight in this paper is the fact that in applying for a child support grant, the caregiver actually needs to have some documentation like the South African ID, the birth certificate, and delay in getting this documentation from government agencies, the bureaucratic delay of getting the right documentation and then applying for the grant actually cause a delay in people getting on the road, especially for people that are applying for the grant for the first time. So first-time mothers that are not experienced in the process of applying for the grant actually experience a lot of delay because of lack of proper documentation. And this has implications. So if child support grant is to incentivize procreation in the population, it is less likely that it's incentivize procreation for new mothers because of the delay. But mothers that already have experience in applying for the grant can then, the barrier may be weaker for them, so they are able to take advantage advantage of procreating more and getting on the CSG roll or getting higher payment from the CSG roll compared to mothers who are new mothers. So in this paper, we argue that experience does matter, that is experience in applying for the grant. We also, this is especially because we have a population of people that actually qualify for the grant but are not yet benefiting from the grant. So we have people who are barred away from actually accessing the grant, not because they are not qualified, but because they don't have the right documentation. So it is important to put that into consideration when analyzing the incentive the child support grant creates. Our results show that between 2008 and 2017, the population of mothers that received child support grant in 2008 actually have more birth attempts than the rest of the population, or than when compared to non-recipient. And this result is robust across a number of econometric strategies that we use. So our data is sourced from the National Income Dynamics Study. So we use wave 1 and wave 5 of the data. Wave 1 is collected in 2008. Wave 5 is collected in 2017. So we have roughly a decade between the two waves. We focus on mothers that are between 15 and 45 years. So those who are in the childbearing age. To capture birth attempts, we consider the question, how many children have you given birth to? Please include all children, even the ones that may have passed away shortly after birth. We add 1 to this figure if the mother reported being currently pregnant. So we consider all birth attempts. The difference between the answer to this question in wave 1 and wave 5 is our outcome variable. In other words, the outcome variable is a count variable. So we consider the Poisson model, the control function Poisson model, and the fixed effect Poisson model to control for endogeneity. So to address the problem of the dispersion, we actually use a Poisson model that controls for that. The assumption is that conditional mean for Poisson model is equal to conditional variance, and when that is violated, the variance can be wrong. So we use the over the sparse Poisson model to control for that. Our instrument is made up of 2 variables. It's a composite instrument. So one of the instruments is possession of South African identity card. The other one is an estimate of the amount of child support grant the caregiver is receiving in wave 1. So the ID is a dummy variable 0 or 1, and we calculate the estimate of, we use the number of CSG the mother is currently receiving as an estimate of experience. So if a caregiver reported receiving X amount, and we know the amount that is disbursed in wave 1, we divide that amount by X, and we have an estimate of how many child support grant that caregiver is receiving. So multiplying 2 to get the 2 variables together will give you 0 if the caregiver does not have an identity card, and 1 or a figure 1 or greater than 1, depending on whether the mother has an ID and is receiving only 1 grant or 2 grants or 3 grants or so on and so forth. So this instrument reflects participation in the program in terms of ID and experience in the program in terms of the number of CSG currently being received. So the figure on the left shows the distribution of the outcome, and we control for a number of variables, including years of education, age at first birth, birth count, self-reported health, dummy for religious affiliation, race, and the income quintile of the household the mother stays in wave 1. And we reported the marginal effect for ease of interpretation. So to go straight to the result, this is the result from the over the sparse Poisson model. I'll focus on the marginal effect. Shows that birth attempt for caregivers that received the child support grant in wave 1 is 28% higher over the last decade compared to the rest of the population. When we control for selection using the control function approach, we'll say here that in the first stage, the instrument is significant in predicting whether somebody actually is in treatment or actually benefit from child support grant or not. And in the second stage, the auxiliary variable 2 is also significant, albeit at 10%. But the estimate shows that birth attempt for caregivers that receive the child program is 85% higher than the rest of the population. Next, we consider the possibility that the two populations we are comparing may be different in terms of income, and we restrict the analysis to those who are below the upper poverty line in 2009. And in doing that, we find that the effect is still significant, not very different from the general effect. So even when you restrict to poor households, you still find the same result. Then we move on to Poisson model with entropy balance. What we did there is similar to what you do on the inverse probability weighting. So we calculate the weights that will balance the distribution of covariates for all covariates across treatment arms, and then we recalculate the estimate. We find that those who benefit from child support grant procreation birth attempt is 24% higher. So the results still remain positive and significant. Again, when we use the post-stratified weights supplied by NID to control to make the analysis nationally representative, we found the same result, and the fixed effect regression yield the same positive result, albeit the estimate is a little bit smaller there. So the reason why our result is different from existing one is probably because, number one, this other study do not control for selection, and the focus on teenage pregnancy and timing of first or second birth. And as we have argued, you're unlikely to find the incentive working for that population of mothers because of the bureaucratic delay in actually applying for the grant. So this result also suggests that controlling for selection is important, as shown by the fact that our result that control for selection yield a higher estimate than when we don't control for selection. And in all this raises the question of sustainability of the child support grant, in terms of the fact that if poor household procreates more, you have thinner allocation of resources in those poor households, and that would lead to a larger proportion of the population needing to depend on the fees cost in the next generation. And so that speaks to the sustainability of the program. Mix that with the current economic situation of South Africa doesn't make for a very good cocktail. So we argue in the paper that a basic income grant can actually help in mitigating this problem, because it doesn't depend on the number of children you have. So I'd like to stop here because of time.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Those really great presentations. We're going to actually stay with Adiola, and so we're going to go through the discussions now. We have very limited time, so I just ask maybe just one main point, and if you can keep it to 2 to 3 minutes, then we'll have time, because we need to wrap up on time. Go, Adiola, discussing.
Thank you very much. I'm discussing the paper about the distribution of malnutrition, especially the paper actually focused on sub-Saharan Africa and Asia, and there are lots of methodological approach that was introduced that make the paper really interesting. The use of Bayesian distribution regression, the comparing the prevalence across space and time, and the use of sense data in trying to figure out whether there is an aspect of the distribution or inequality in malnutrition that is explained by that kind of information. The author was careful to note that what they have identified is not causation, but a correlation between those variables and malnutrition. They found gender and strong nonlinear effects in socioeconomic factors. The point that I want to raise about, I was surprised that the science data did not pick up anything. I think I asked the question in the chat, and the author has provided an answer. So basically, what I like about the paper is the fact that it makes use of spatial analysis and provides a very clear picture of what has been going on. In terms of policy implication, the fact that there are pockets of places where the improvement is not actually significant, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, around West Africa, where actually I'm familiar with. Perhaps some of the explanation to that may be the insurgence of terrorist groups, which because most of those areas rely on subsistence agriculture, and if you have a situation where there is insecurity, that may actually worsen the situation for them. Not to take too much of our time, I think I would like to stop here.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Adela. So Johannes, talking about Jayanta's paper.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your great presentation. I think Jayanta. What do I want to add? Well, basically the paper tries to find possible explanations for the difference in the under 5 mortality rates of lower castes and higher castes, and why lower castes have higher mortality under 5 mortality rates in for selected regions in India. And in the context, basically, nationally, under 5 mortality declined. And however, still there's a differential between high and low castes in India. And they also tries to find an explanation for this, why there, even so there are designated programs to compensate for to strengthen the lower castes, still there's this differential, and basically they try to come up with possible explanations why or possible causes for this differential. And my questions would be, first of all, can the results somehow be generalized to all the other regions in India? And apart from strengthen women's education and improving the wealth of marginalized households, are there any further aspects you could add in a policy context? And one additional point I was really kind of got my attention was that you mentioned that there's a spatial clustering of under 5 mortality within your selected regions. And I was wondering if you thought of possible explanations for this, e.g., for instance, is there higher conflict incidents, or are those regions somehow differ geographically from the other regions, or is, for instance, drought there a bigger problem? Yeah, and to keep it short, I think I would stop here and
Great, thank you.
give.
Thank you. Well, good. Thank you for the fast paced. We'll keep going. Jayanta discussing Saravana's paper.
Yeah, so this paper is parental investment and early childhood development, short and long term evidence from India. So this is actually this is a good technically sound paper, what I can read from the papers, and author try to emphasize on the overall impact of the early child intervention program, which is the ICDS program, main focus in the ICDS programs. And they're just trying to find out the whether these programs are depend on the indirect impact or that arises due to the intra-household reallocations and the parental investments. And this program is a comprehensive program that started in 1975, and author tried to find out with the different set of data set like ICDS administrative data, NFSS data, ISDS data, NSS and SFR. These kind of data the author use, and they done a good analysis. They use for 2 period models, 2 child parental investment. So different aspects they are trying to analyze, and then author also conducted cost benefit analysis to understand the relative magnitude of the direct and indirect impact, how they are conducted, and they found some the direct impact on health and wages, and both direct and indirect, and they said 9% is decreased due to these factors. And also the author tried to see the variations of the program intensity across space and time on the impact of this program on the child for the short-term period programs, and then the long-term impact of the program on the adult. So in the different health aspects also, author tries to understand, try to point it out some of the aspects. and also discuss about the direct impact and indirect impact in a good way. And also the author discuss about some of the mechanisms like interparental reallocations or parental investments and how it rulings out the impact on parental employment and wages. So this is clearly mentioned. And finally, the author try to find out the results that the expose the program when youngs showed significant improvement in various measurement of health, education, and labor market incomes. And also the provided evidence that the parents reallocated nutrition and educational investment to our children expose the increase the program intensity, which leads to the negative sibling spillover. So this is also one of the good finding. And finally, the conclusion in the paper is that the overall impact of childhood program depends on both direct impact and expose of the cohort as well as the indirect impact, which arises due to the reallocation of parental investments. But here I want just wonder one point from this paper, since author used the multiple source of database and the survey setting of the data and the time period is the different, and also author has tried to segregate the data at the lower level, the district level, but district and lower administrative level. But the NFSs, previous round of NFSs and NSAs and NSS, National Sample Survey data, and ISD data, they have only the state level. So I'm just wonder how the data has been organized, and but that is missing something in the paper. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Jayanta. And Saravana discussing Adeola's paper.
Hi, so thank you for the opportunity to discuss this paper. I thought it was a great paper, really well motivated and very well written up. So the sort of one sentence summary is that individuals who benefited from this South African child support grant had more birth attempts within the last decade compared to non-beneficiaries of the program. And so, I'm somewhat biased in that, I just presented a paper on unintended sort of effects. And so I really like that motivation. And this is not something completely bizarre or unheard of, right? And the authors motivated very well. Then they say, look, in the US, there's literature showing this for programs there as well, which then lead to a clear set of policy implications, right? So there in the US, for example, there are family caps. In effect, you're not eligible to get some of these for families with children more than one. In the South African context, there's a current family cap of 6 children, but that in essence is non-binding because that's maybe not the margin at which you may want to apply the policy. I think a more restrictive cap may be needed, and it's very well motivated in the sort of policy environment of the government is spending so much money on this. It's the second largest welfare scheme in the country, and we need to care about this, right? So I really like that about the paper. On the and I have some written up suggestions. I'll send this to you. But if there was one suggestion, I think there's a section where there's a very interesting discussion of the interpretation of the results relative to the Rosenberg et al. Paper. And I think that's interesting, but it's also challenging in that there's this paper which shows that which studies in essence a very similar question, trying to understand whether there was a fertility response in response to the program, and they find sort of null effects, right? And so you in the paper lay out 3 reasons for why the results here might differ. In reading those 3 reasons, I thought that the direction of those could all sort of be working against your results, right? So I was reading it, sort of trying to understand. Oh, okay. I think with this, I would expect to see that there is a fertility response, but on sort of you talk about the margin. Is it the second birth versus births over the whole decade, the geographic coverage and the rural sample versus South Africa wide sample, and the time frame as well, looking at earlier years versus later years. But then you talk about how in real terms, the benefit actually has been decreasing or over time. And so I think those are somewhat working against trying to find this fertility response. So I was curious more on the interpretation relative to the literature. So I can send you more comments, but thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Saravana. So I think what would be great is if we just hear from Farzana, who's been monitoring the chat and the Q&A, and if there's like a couple of points, Farzana, that you want to add into the discussion, and then we'll do a quick 1 minute from everyone.
Jocelyn, do you want to let the speakers respond to any of the comments before that? So I think
do you think that they're all like they got brought out?
Yeah, the speakers have done a great job of answering almost, most of the questions in the chat box. I think there are a few questions which are still, left unaddressed by Jayanta. But how do you want to do this then?
Yeah, so maybe let's go back, let's swing back through the authors then, and maybe just a 1 minute response each, and let's go in order. And so Johannes.
Yep. Which question? Or
yeah, you choose. One of the main ones, like what's our big take-home message that you want to make sure that we all go home with?
When I read the questions, I think you asked about what's the difference in the methodology. Basically, I was thinking about this for quite a while, and what not bothered me, but what I thought what the other paper not did, they basically made out of the anthropometric status a
this is the IMHE, just for the benefit of the listeners. The IMHE, who have come to the fore because of their COVID-19 case reporting, and they've come in and out of favor. And so your methodology reminded me of that a lot. And so
and I think they did a similar paper on also on stunting, if I'm not mistaken, and they basically made a binary variable out of the anthropometric status, and you use a lot of variation in the response. So from my perspective, basically leaving this variable continuous basically should give way better insight in this issue, because I mean, what's the difference between an anthropometric status of, let's say, 1.9 and 2.1? I mean, the difference is not that big, and the one is close to the cutoff and is being 1, and the other one is not stunted. So for me, this is one of the major differences. Otherwise, they highlighted that they did not allow for differences between the gender. And as there's the paper by Trevor Hastie and Robtip Shirani, who introduced varying coefficients that you basically can, within one model, account for those differences, and then basically in the end get a different map for girls and boys. So those are the major differences, I would say.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question.
Thanks, Johannes. Jayanta, our big take-home message in response to the questions.
Yeah, thank you for the comment. Actually, I want to highlight Zohan's comment. That the selection of the IFOCUS instead, this is because of the NFSS data. What we found, the low socioeconomic indicators, they have the poor performance in terms of program indicators, and their health indicators and developing indicator relatively poor compared to the other states. That's why we have selected that 9 high focus state, and as per the literature, this already identified as a high focus state, and government has already taken some of the intervention program, especially for these regions and especially these SCSTs, and as also suggested to expand to the national level. But yes, we can expand it, but we want to focus this paper only on that part area. because SC/ST population also high in MP than Uttar Pradesh and Chhattisgarh and Bihar. So that's why we want to highlight it in this part actually. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Saravana, our take-home message.
Great notes. So thank you. I think I responded to some of your Johannes and Farzana's questions. And Jayanta, thank you for the discussion. I think that's helpful to know that if in places in the paper it's unclear how I'm doing the exact data match, it's at the district level. That's sort of the lowest level at which the administrative data as well as the survey data sets are identified. So I can clarify that as well as the exact time periods, age ranges, and so on. So I think that's very helpful. But yeah, I think this is great feedback as I revise the paper. So thank you.
Great. Adiola, and can I invite everybody to put their cameras on so I can do a nice group shot screenshot?
Yeah, so Ravana, thank you for that summary of the paper. And to be candid, that section of the paper that you referred to was me sort of anticipating, because this is a very touchy issue in South Africa. You're immediately labeled right or left, depending on what people perceive that you're trying to. So you see from the beginning of the presentation, I try to upfront jump on that issue. So that is my attempt to say, okay, I've seen this paper and this is the reason why I think the result is different. But then if it's coming across like I'm shooting myself in the foot, then I'm looking forward to seeing your response on that. Then I can rework that section of the paper, not to be shooting myself in the foot, basically.
Great. Thank you everybody so much for joining this session and for keeping it on time. We actually have a more relaxed way of meeting now in Meet the Author. So you should all have the Zoom links for that, and I'll be connecting over into that. And I was on the one for fertility yesterday, and it's actually really fun just to chit chat with everybody there. So I hope to see people over there shortly. Okay. Thanks everybody. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.